Close your eyes for a moment, if you like. You won't need them for what comes next. Imagine the world before electric light, before glass that lets in light but keeps out cold, before the small, constant hum of machines we've all stopped noticing. Imagine a darkness so complete that the moon was something people genuinely planned their nights around. That is where we are going tonight. Not to a battlefield, not to a coronation, not to any of the moments that usually fill the history books. We are going somewhere quieter, to a small village in the English Midlands, somewhere in the closing years of the 1200s, where the grass is wet before dawn and the smoke from 100 low chimneys hangs over the fields like a soft gray blanket. We are going to spend a week there, not as a visitor passing through, but as someone who has to live it, who has to wake when the cocks crow, eat what the land gives, and survive on nothing but skill, neighbors, and luck. You will not need to remember dates tonight. You will not need to memorize the names of kings. All you need to do is breathe, settle into wherever you're lying, and let the village come to you, one quiet hour at a time. Because the truth is, most people today carry a picture of medieval life that isn't quite right. We imagine castles and knights, plagues and witch trials, mud and misery from morning to night. And some of that did happen, here and there in its season. But for most people, in most years, medieval life was something else entirely, a long, careful rhythm of work and rest, danger and devotion, shaped by the sun, the soil, and the turning of the seasons. Tonight, we find out what a single week of that rhythm actually felt like. Not from the outside, the way a textbook tells it. From the inside, the cold of the floor under bare feet, the smell of bread rising near a banked fire, the particular ache of a body that has spent 12 hours bent over a field. Let's begin gently, the way the week itself began. Before the work, before the bells. While the village was still asleep, there is a particular kind of darkness that exists only in a world without lamps left burning. It is not menacing, it simply is. Thick, complete, pressing softly against shuttered windows and thatched eaves, broken only by the very last orange threads of a fire that has been banked down to embers for the night. In a small wattle and daub house at the edge of the village, one room, low-beamed, smelling of wood smoke and last night's pottage, a woman is the first to wake. We don't know her real name, of course. No record survives of her. But across thousands of households like hers, scattered through the English countryside in this era, the pattern of her morning would have looked much the same. And so for tonight, let's simply call her Mathold, a name common enough to her time and place. Mathold wakes before the birds, not because of any bell or clock, there are none in her house, but because her body has learned, over years, exactly how dark the room should be when it's time to rise. She lies for a moment listening, her husband breathing slow and even beside her, a child shifting under a worn wool blanket near the wall, the faint, steady tick of rain that fell sometime in the night and has now softened to a drip from the eaves. She rises carefully, feeling for the dirt floor with her feet, finding it packed hard and slightly cool. There is no mattress, as we'd recognize one only a frame of rope or boards, topped with a sack stuffed with straw, refreshed perhaps twice a year. It is enough. It has always been enough. The first task of the day, before anything else, is the fire. Fire in this world is not something you simply summon. It is something you protect, like a small, living thing that must never be allowed to die completely. The night before, Mathild banked the coals carefully under a heap of ash, leaving just enough warmth buried at the center to survive until morning. Now she kneels, breathes gently into that orange heart, feeds it the thinnest splinters of dry kindling, and watches, patient, until a small flame catches and steadies. If it had gone out entirely, the morning would have meant a walk to a neighbor's house, cupped hands carrying a borrowed coal back through the cold, an errand every household in the village dreaded, because it meant admitting, however briefly, that you needed help. Outside, the village is beginning to stir in the same quiet way. A rooster announces itself, then a second, further off, answering. Somewhere a dog barks once and falls silent. The air smells of damp earth, wood smoke, and the particular green smell of a field after rain. This village, and we'll return to it many times this week, sits in a gentle fold of land somewhere in the English Midlands. A scatter of perhaps 30 households, a manor house at its center, a small stone church with a square tower, and beyond it all, the open fields stretching toward a line of woodland on the horizon. The land here is heavy clay, good for wheat in a wet year and stubborn in a dry one. A stream runs along the eastern edge, turning a mill wheel that belongs, like most things here, to the lord of the manor. It is worth pausing here, gently, to understand something important about this world, because it shapes everything else we'll see this week. Most of the people in this village are not free in the way we understand freedom today. They are villains' peasants, bound to the land and to their lord through a web of customary obligations stretching back generations. They cannot simply leave. They owe labor on the Lord's own fields, a set number of days each week, in addition to working their own strips of land to feed their families. In exchange, they receive something real, a home, a portion of land to work, and a measure of protection in a world with no police, no insurance, and no safety net beyond the people around you. Historians still debate exactly how harsh or how tolerable this system felt to the people living inside it. Some records show lords who pushed their peasants hard, extracting every customary due to the letter. Others show long, almost neighborly relationships between manor and village, built over decades of shared bad harvests and shared good ones. The truth, most likely, sat somewhere in between and varied enormously from one manor to the next. What we can say with more confidence is this: survival here depended less on any single person's strength and more on the cooperation of the whole village, working in something close to unison, season after season. Back inside Mathild's home, the fire has caught properly now, and she sets a blackened pot of water near its edge to warm. Her husband, we might call him Wulfric, though again, no name survives for the real man who lived this life, stirs awake at the smell of smoke and the small sounds of the morning. He has perhaps 6 hours of sleep behind him, less in the busy seasons. There will be no more than that tonight either. The two of them dress in the dim firelight. Clothing here is simple, practical, and worth understanding properly, because it's so different from what we imagine. A peasant's everyday clothes were made of coarse wool, sometimes linen for undergarments, dyed in muted earth tones, brown, dull green, gray, because bright dyes were costly and reserved, when used at all, for special occasions. Wulfric pulls on a long tunic over linen braize, wraps strips of cloth around his lower legs for warmth and protection against brambles, and laces on shoes of soft leather, already cracked and patched from years of wear. Mathil dresses in layers too, a long underdress, a wool gown over it, an apron, and a simple linen cap covering her hair, as was expected of married women across most of medieval Europe. There is a particular intimacy to mornings like this one that's easy to miss if you only picture medieval life from a distance. A family dressing together by firelight, a pot of water warming, a child stirring awake under a blanket. These are not so different from quiet mornings now. The textures are different. The pace is different. But the feeling of a household slowly waking into a new day is something we would recognize instantly if we were standing quietly in the corner of that room. Breakfast, such as it is, comes quickly and simply. Bread from yesterday's baking, perhaps softened in warmed milk or weak ale, eaten standing or seated on a low bench near the fire. There is no grand meal to begin the day. The household's real eating happens later, built around the rhythm of labor rather than the clock. And now, as gray light begins to seep around the edges of the shuttered window, the day's true demands begin to arrive. Outside, somewhere across the village, a bell from the small stone church begins to ring, not loud, not urgent, simply present, marking the hour the way it has every morning of Mathild and Wulfric's lives, and every morning of their parents' lives before them. It is time to go out into the fields. Step outside with Wulfric for a moment, into a morning still gray at the edges, mist lying low across the open fields like something spilled and not yet absorbed. The fields surrounding this village stretch in long, narrow strips, divided not by hedgerows, those will come centuries later in many parts of England, but by unplowed turf ridges called balks. Thin green lines running across the open landscape like stitching. This is the open field system, the great organizing structure of English farming in this era, and understanding it changes how you see the whole landscape. Rather than each family farming one consolidated plot, the village's arable land is divided into 2 or 3 enormous fields, and within each field, every household holds a number of long, scattered strips, an acre here, half an acre there, mixed in among strips belonging to neighbors, the church, and the Lord himself. It sounds inefficient to modern ears, and in some ways it was. But it also meant that good land and poor land, land near the village and land further out, were shared fairly across the whole community. No single family was left only with the worst soil, or only with fields too far to walk to twice a day. Each year, one of the great fields lies fallow resting, ungrazed crop on it, the soil recovering while the others are sown with wheat, barley, oats, peas, or beans, in a careful rotation that the village has refined over generations without ever writing down a word of agricultural theory. They simply know, through long observation, that land worked too hard gives less each year, and land rested gives more. It is a kind of wisdom passed mouth to mouth, season to season, with no scientific explanation attached to it, and no need for one. This particular week falls in early autumn, and the work reflects it. The harvest itself, that frantic, sunlit race against weather that defines high summer, is finished. What remains now is the equally important, quieter labor of preparing the soil for next year's planting and bringing in whatever crops ripen late. Wulfric walks out to his strips with a wooden-handled tool slung over one shoulder, joining a thin trickle of other men and women moving the same direction along the muddy track. Greetings are brief, mostly nods, mostly silence. Conversation can wait until the work itself allows for it. The soil here, heavy clay, holds water stubbornly. After autumn rain, it clings to boots and tools alike, and turning it requires real strength. The wooden plow this village uses heavy, awkward by modern standards, often shared between several households who can't afford one alone, needs to be pulled by oxen. And oxen are valuable, scarce, and carefully scheduled among the village's households. Wulfric's family doesn't own a full plow team. He shares with two neighboring households, an arrangement built on years of trust and mutual need, the kind of quiet cooperation that made village life possible at all. While Wulfric waits his turn with the shared plow team, there is other work to do by hand. Clearing stubble, repairing the low banks that mark his strips, carrying manure collected carefully over the year out to spread across the resting field, every scrap of fertility precious in a world with no other way to replenish the soil. It's worth pausing here to notice something easy to overlook: the sheer physical scale of this labor, done entirely without machines. Every furrow plowed, every load carried, every animal led, depended on human and animal muscle alone. A day's work might mean walking many miles back and forth across a single field, bent forward, repeating the same motion hundreds of times, in clothing that offered little real protection from cold or wet. And yet, and this matters, because it's easy to imagine only misery here, the work was not without its satisfactions. There is a particular deep contentment that comes from watching a task completed with your own hands, season after season, and seeing the direct, visible result of your labor. A field cleared, a strip turned, a season's harvest gathered safely into a barn. Modern life has, in many ways, lost touch with that kind of immediate, physical proof of a day well spent. The people of this village, for all their hardships, had it in abundance. Mid-morning brings a brief pause. Mathild arrives from the village carrying a small basket bread, perhaps a wedge of hard cheese, a skin of weak ale, the drink of choice for most peasants, since the water here, drawn from shallow village wells, could not always be trusted. An ale, brewed and slightly fermented, was safer to drink throughout the day. The break is short. Workers eat standing or seated briefly on the turf balks separating the strips before returning to the soil. By midday, the mist has burned away entirely, replaced by pale autumn sunlight slanting low across the fields. Children too young to be much help in serious labor-run errands between house and field carrying messages, fetching tools, minding younger siblings while their mothers work. Even small children in this world contributed what they could. Idleness was a luxury almost no household could afford. Though play and laughter were woven through the work all the same, the way they always are wherever children gather. Across the field, you can hear the manor's own laborers at work too, for today is one of the days when villagers like Wulfric owe service on the Lord's land directly, plowing or carting for him before they're free to finish their own strips. This is the heart of the manorial system, labor owed, not chosen, structured into the calendar with the same regularity as feast days and fasts. It would be easy, looking at this from a distance of 700 or 800 years, to see only the unfairness of it, and there was real unfairness here, no question. But it would also miss something true, that within this structure, a whole social world existed, full of its own etiquette, its own humor, its own quiet acts of generosity between neighbors who depended on each other in ways modern life rarely requires. A bad harvest threatened everyone equally. A good one was, in its own modest way, a shared triumph. As the afternoon wears on, the light begins its early autumn fade, and the rhythm of the fields shifts again, tools gathered, the shared oxen led back toward their owners' homes, the day's earth still clinging to hands and hems. Soon, the village bell will sound again, marking not an alarm, but simply the closing of one more ordinary day in a world built almost entirely around the patient, repeating turn of the seasons. And as the light fades fully into evening, our attention turns toward the warmth of the hearth, once more toward supper, rest, and the particular peace that settles over a village when the work of the day is finally, quietly done. We'll continue there shortly. By the time the last gray light drains out of the sky, the village has already begun to fold inward on itself, the way it does every evening at this time of year. Doors that stood open all day are pulled half shut against the cold. Smoke thickens over the rooftops as fires are built up again for the evening, and somewhere beneath all of it, quietly, the smell of supper begins to spread from one house to the next. Inside Mathild and Wulfric's home, supper is not a grand affair, but it is, in its own way, the heart of the day. A blackened iron pot has been simmering since midday at the edge of the hearth, filled with what's known simply as pottage, a thick stew of grain, peas or beans, and whatever vegetables the season allows. Tonight it might hold cabbage, leeks, perhaps a little barley, thickened slowly over hours until it has the consistency of a hearty porridge. Meat appears in it only occasionally, a little salted bacon, a bone for flavor, saved carefully and stretched across several meals rather than consumed all at once. This single detail tells us something important about medieval life that's easy to miss. We tend to picture peasants eating almost nothing but bread and grim porridge, day after day, with meat reserved entirely for the wealthy. The truth, as historians piecing together old kitchen records and even chemical traces from cooking pots have found, is a little gentler than that. Peasant households did eat meat, dairy, and vegetables, just less of it, and less often, than the tables of lords and monasteries. A bowl of pottage, eaten alongside a thick slice of dark bread, was not a meal of pure deprivation. It was simply a meal shaped entirely by what the land gave, the season allowed, and the household could spare. The family gathers close around the low table, bowls passed hand to hand, bread torn rather than cut. There is little conversation about the day's labor that would be unusual, almost unnecessary, since everyone present already knows exactly what the day demanded. Instead, talk turns to smaller things: a neighbor's lambing, a rumor from the market town 2 days' walk away, whether the apples on the old tree by the churchyard will be worth gathering this year. It's worth imagining, for a moment, just how dim this room actually is by evening. A single rush light, a reed, dipped in animal fat, burning with a small, unsteady flame, or perhaps a tallow candle, if the household can spare the wax, casts a soft circle of orange light over the table, leaving the corners of the room in shadow. There is no reading by this light, not for a family that likely cannot read in any case. There is no late-night activity of the kind we take for granted now. When the fire burns low and the light dims further, the natural rhythm of the body simply takes over, and the household moves toward sleep. But not every evening in the village looks like this one. On certain days, and tonight, as it happens, is one of them. A different kind of light burns up on the low hill at the village's edge, where the manor house stands behind its modest timber fence. Let's walk up there together for a moment, gently, the way a villager might if summoned for some piece of business with the Lord's steward. The manor house is not a castle. It would be a mistake to imagine turrets and stone battlements here. In a small rural manor like this one, in this period, the house is more often a single great hall, a long timber-framed building, perhaps with a few smaller rooms attached for storage, a kitchen, and private sleeping quarters for the Lord's family. At one end of the hall stands a raised platform, the dais, where the Lord and his household dine at a head table, visible to everyone below them in the hall. It is a small but very deliberate piece of architecture, a structure built to be seen, to make rank and order visible at a glance, every single evening. Tonight, this is exactly what's happening. Trestle tables have been set up along the length of the hall, and the Lord's household, his family, his steward, a handful of servants, perhaps a visiting guest passing through on some errand of business or pilgrimage, gathers to eat together. This communal dining was considered, in this era, a matter of real moral importance, Bishops of the time wrote letters advising lords to keep their households eating together in the open hall, rather than slipping away to dine privately, warning that private meals bred waste and showed poor honor to a household. Whether every lord followed that advice is another matter entirely, but the ideal itself tells us something about how deeply this society valued visible shared order. The food on this table looks different from the pottage simmering in Mathild's home tonight. There is more meat, perhaps mutton or beef, since this is a manor with its own modest flocks and herds more wheat bread, instead of the coarser barley and rye loaves common in peasant homes, and very likely ale or wine of a better quality than what circulates through the village. And yet, even here, the meal follows the rhythms of the church calendar just as strictly as it does in any peasant home. Fasting days mean fish instead of meat, even at the Lord's own table. And during certain seasons, even the wealthy adjust their meals according to rules that apply, in some form, to everyone in medieval Christendom. It would be easy to look at this contrast, the Lord's hall and the peasant's hearth, and see only inequality. And there was real inequality here, woven into the very architecture of who sat where and ate what. But it's worth resisting the urge to flatten this into a simple story of villains and victims. The manor existed because, in this world, someone needed to organize labor, store surplus grain against bad years, maintain a mill, settle disputes, and offer some form of protection in a landscape without any of the institutions we rely on today. Whether any particular lord did these things generously or harshly varied enormously, household to household, decade to decade, and the historical record, frankly, is full of both kindness and cruelty, often within the very same family. For Wulfric and Mathild, tonight is an ordinary evening, untouched by any business at the manor. The light up on the hill is simply a fact of the landscape, the way a lit window in a distant house might be to us now present, visible, but not part of their evening at all. Back in their own home, the fire is allowed to burn down slowly, embers banked carefully once more for the morning. The children are settled onto their straw pallet, blanket pulled close. And the household, exactly as it has every night before this one, slips quietly into sleep, while outside, the village falls into the same deep, complete darkness it woke from many hours before. Morning comes again, as it always does, but this morning feels different, and everyone in the village can sense it the moment they wake. It is Sunday. For 6 days, the rhythm of this village has bent almost entirely around labor the fields, the Lord's service, the small unending tasks of keeping a household fed and warm. But on this 7th day, that rhythm shifts, gently but firmly, towards something else entirely: rest, worship, and the rare pleasure of unhurried time among neighbors. Peasants in this era did not work the fields on Sundays, and this single fact says a great deal about how medieval life was structured. It wasn't simply tradition for tradition's sake. It was built into the deepest foundations of how this society understood time itself, divided not merely into days and seasons, but into sacred and ordinary, work, and rest, in a pattern repeated every single week of every single year, for as long as anyone in the village could remember. Mathilde rises a little later than usual, the morning light already pale gold through the cracks in the shutters by the time she's properly dressed. There's no plowing today, no carrying of manure, no waiting in line for the shared ox team. Instead, the household readies itself for something almost ceremonial in its regularity: the walk to church. The small stone church at the heart of the village, the same building whose bell has marked every morning and evening of the week we've spent here, becomes, on Sunday, the true center of village life. Nearly everyone attends. It is one of the only moments in the entire week when the whole community gathers in one place at one time. Lord's household and peasant family alike, standing or kneeling together inside the same modest stone walls. Picture it for a moment. The interior is dim, lit by a handful of candles and whatever daylight manages to filter through narrow windows. The air smells of cold stone, beeswax, and the faint smoke of incense. There are no pews to sit in, not yet most of the congregation stands throughout the service. Young children fidgeting quietly near their mothers, older villagers leaning on the stone walls for support. The priest, likely a man known to every person in that room by name, leads the service in Latin, a language understood fully by very few people present, and yet utterly familiar in its rhythm and sound, repeated every week of their lives. It would be a mistake to imagine this as something dry or distant. For many in the village, this was one of the deepest sources of comfort and meaning available to them, a sense of order in the universe, of being watched over, of belonging to something larger than the soil and the season. Faith in this world was not a separate compartment of life, set apart from the everyday. It was woven into nearly everything: blessings before meals, prayers before sleep, saints invoked for protection during childbirth or illness, the entire calendar of the year itself structured around feast days and fasts that everyone, literate or not, understood by heart. After the service ends, the morning slowly loosens into something rare and valuable unstructured time. Groups linger in the churchyard, exchanging news the way villagers everywhere always have: who is to be married, whose cow has gone lame, what the weather portends for the coming week. Children, freed from even the small errands they run during the working week, play games in the open space near the church, simple chasing games and contests of skill with stones or sticks, the kind of play that needs no equipment and leaves no trace in the historical record, and yet surely filled this churchyard exactly the way it fills playgrounds now. For the rest of the day, the village settles into something close to leisure, though never quite idleness in the way we might imagine it. Mathilde may spend the afternoon spinning wool by the open door, catching the last good light of the day, a task gentle enough to count as rest after 6 days of harder labor. Wulfric might walk to a neighbor's house to discuss the week ahead, or simply sit outside in the pale autumn sun, mending a tool or simply talking, unhurried, for the first time in days. This is also, in many villages, a time for shared customs that blur the line between rest and community obligation. There might be a small gathering near the manor or the green, neighbors trading small goods, perhaps a modest feast day approaching on the church calendar that everyone is already, quietly, looking forward to a saint's day, perhaps, that will bring a brief pause from the ordinary rhythm of fast and labor, with a little more food on the table and a little more music in the air than usual. As the afternoon fades, there's a particular gentle melancholy that settles over a village on a Sunday evening, the same feeling, really, that exists in any place, in any century, when a day of rest draws toward its close and the ordinary demands of the week begin, quietly, to reassert themselves. Tomorrow, the fields will call again. The shared ox team will need scheduling. The Lord's steward will expect service on the appointed days, exactly as he has every week before this one. But tonight, at least, there is still a little time left. The fire is built up one more time, supper shared a little more slowly than usual, voices unhurried in the dim glow of the hearth. Outside, the church bell rings its final note of the day, marking not labor, not obligation, but simply the quiet, settled rhythm of a community that has learned, over centuries, exactly how to rest as completely as it works. And as that bell fades into the cold evening air, the village settles once more into darkness, ready, in the morning, to begin the working week all over again. Some mornings in this village begin no differently than any other. But this one, a little past the middle of the week, carries a small charge of anticipation that even the children can sense before they're fully awake. Today is market day. Not in the village itself, this is far too small a place to host its own chartered market, but in the larger town that sits perhaps an hour and a half's walk to the east, along a rutted track that winds past fields, over a narrow wooden bridge, and through a stretch of half-cleared woodland before opening, finally, onto a wider road. It's worth understanding just how significant market towns were in this world, because it's easy to underestimate them. By this point in English history, kings had granted charters for well over 1,000 market towns across the country, each one given the right to hold trade on a fixed day of the week, free from competition by any nearby rival market on that same day. These charters weren't just bureaucratic formalities. They created small, regular pulses of commerce that connected villages like this one, otherwise nearly self-sufficient, nearly invisible to the wider kingdom, to a much larger web of trade stretching out toward the coast, toward London, and in certain goods, toward distant lands most villagers would never see and could barely imagine. Mathold rises even earlier than usual this morning, gathering what the household has to sell. It's mostly modest goods eggs from the few hens kept in a wattle pen behind the house, a small basket of late-season apples from the tree near the churchyard, perhaps a pot of butter, carefully salted to keep through the journey. This kind of small-scale selling, historians have found, was very often the particular responsibility of peasant women, who carried what surplus a household could spare on foot to market, transforming a few spare eggs or a little extra wool into the coins needed to pay rents, buy salt, or replace a broken tool. Wulfric, meanwhile, has his own business at the market today, a small debt to settle with a tanner over a piece of leather purchased some weeks before, and an eye out for any news of work to be had beyond the village, since the autumn slack season sometimes allows a man to earn a few extra days' wages elsewhere if the opportunity presents itself. The walk itself is a small adventure in its own right. The road is narrow, sometimes muddy enough to suck at the ankles, and travelers move along it in loose, friendly clusters, a neighbor here, a stranger from the next village there, a peddler with a heavy pack who falls into step beside them for a stretch, trading news for company. Conversation on this road is one of the few ways information moves at all in this world. There is no broadsheet, no messenger riding daily between villages. What people know of the wider kingdom, a poor harvest 2 counties over, a wedding among the local gentry, rumors of unrest somewhere far to the north, arrives almost entirely this way, mouth to mouth, carried on roads exactly like this one. As the trees thin and the road widens, the town itself comes into view, and it's a different world from the quiet village left behind. Houses press close together along narrow streets, many with shop fronts open directly onto the road, a baker's oven breathing heat and the smell of fresh loaves, a tanner's yard with its sharp, particular smell, an alehouse already filling with morning customers despite the early hour. Far more people live within sight of each other here than anywhere in the village, and the noise of the place voices, cartwheels, animals being driven to pen, someone hammering somewhere out of sight feels almost overwhelming after the relative quiet of country roads. The market square itself sits at the town center, exactly as it has for generations, framed by the church on one side and a scattering of permanent shop fronts on the others. A worn stone cross stands at its heart, not purely decorative, but a genuine marker of the market's official standing, a quiet symbol that trade here happens under the protection and order of both crown and church alike. Stalls and blankets spread out across the open ground in a rough, informal pattern that nonetheless follows its own unspoken logic. Grain sellers cluster in one corner. A separate stretch is given over to poultry and small livestock, geese and chickens calling out in protest at the unfamiliar crowd. Cloth merchants display their wares on raised trestle tables, while peasant women like Mathild simply lay their smaller goods out on cloths spread directly on the ground, paying a small toll to the market officials for the privilege. And scattered among the local familiar goods are occasional glimpses of a much wider world, a trader offering salt carried up from the coast. Another with small clay pots of spice that have traveled hand to hand, an almost unimaginable distance from lands far to the south and east. Mathild and Wulfric will likely never own such things themselves, but simply seeing them, smelling the unfamiliar scent of a spice carried halfway across the known world, is its own small, quiet wonder a reminder, even here, that the village is not entirely cut off from the larger pulse of the age. Mathild finds her place among the other women, selling small household goods, spreading her cloth, setting out her eggs and apples and butter, with the practiced efficiency of someone who has done this many times before. Trade here moves through bargaining, not fixed prices, a quiet, almost ritual back and forth between buyer and seller, voices low, a final price settled with a nod rather than any written record. By midday, her basket is considerably lighter, and a small handful of coins sits carefully knotted into a cloth tucked against her body, already mentally allotted toward rent, toward salt, toward whatever small need the coming weeks will bring. It's worth pausing gently on what this market actually represents in the larger structure of medieval life. We tend to imagine peasants as living in near total isolation, scratching out a bare subsistence with no real connection to money or trade. The truth, as economic historians piecing together centuries of toll records and court disputes have found, looks rather different. Peasant households across England were woven, in small but real ways, into a genuine market economy selling surplus, buying what they couldn't produce themselves, calculating, however roughly, the value of their own labor against the coins it could bring. It was a modest, local kind of commerce, nothing like the great trading fortunes of merchants in larger cities. But it was commerce all the same, and it gave a household like Mathild and Wulfric's a small, vital measure of flexibility that pure self-sufficiency alone could never provide. By early afternoon, the crowd in the square has begun to thin, traders packing away unsold goods, animals being driven back out along the roads they arrived on. Wulfric finds Mathild near the church steps, his own business with the tanner settled, a small bundle of purchases a length of new rope, a paper twist of salt tucked under one arm. The walk home feels different from the walk out. Slower, perhaps, weighted by tiredness and the gentle satisfaction of a day's business concluded. The light has already begun its early autumn slant by the time the village comes back into view. Smoke rising from familiar chimneys, the church tower catching the last warm color of the afternoon sun. There is something deeply comforting, even now, in that particular feeling, the return home after a day spent somewhere larger, louder, full of unfamiliar faces, and the quiet relief of seeing your own rooftop appear again at the bend in the road. Not every villager spends their days bent over a field. And tonight, before we return to the rhythm of farming life, it's worth spending a little time with someone whose work looked entirely different, someone whose skill, in its own quiet way, held the whole village together just as surely as the harvest did. At the edge of the village green stands a low timber building, slightly apart from the houses around it, marked by a particular sound that carries across the whole settlement at certain hours of the day, the steady, ringing clang of hammer against iron. This is the smithy, and the man who works there, let's call him Aldous, again a name typical of the period rather than a specific historical figure, holds a position in this small community that's easy to underestimate from a distance of many centuries. A village blacksmith in this era was not simply a tradesman among many. He was, in a very real sense, essential infrastructure, the only person within walking distance capable of repairing a broken plowshare, shoeing a horse, mending the iron fittings on a cartwheel, or forging the simple tools that every farming household depended on completely. Without Aldous, much of the physical machinery of village life would simply grind to a halt within a season. His forge sits at the heart of his workshop, a stone hearth, built to hold heat far beyond what any household fire would need, fed by carefully chosen charcoal rather than ordinary wood, since charcoal burns hotter and cleaner, exactly what iron requires to soften enough to be shaped. A young apprentice, perhaps a boy of 12 or 13 taken on from a nearby family, works the bellows steadily, feeding air into the coals until they glow a deep, almost impossible orange. Watching iron work might be one of the more genuinely mesmerizing sights available to anyone in this village, and it's easy to imagine children drifting toward the open doorway of the smithy simply to watch, the way children have always gathered around skilled hands doing something they don't yet understand. Aldous draws a glowing iron rod from the fire with long tongs, lays it across his anvil, and begins to hammer not randomly, but with the practiced rhythm of someone who has done this exact motion thousands of times before, shaping metal that would resist almost any other kind of force into precisely the curve, the edge, the form that's needed. Today's work is mundane but vital, repairing a plow blade bent during the week's plowing, mending a hinge for the Manor's barn door, and forging a handful of new nails for a neighbor, building a modest extension onto his home. None of this is glamorous work. In the way we might imagine medieval craftsmanship, no swords, no elaborate ironwork, nothing destined for any noble hall. It is the unglamorous, essential labor of keeping ordinary life functioning, week after week, season after season. It's worth noting, too, that Aldous occupies a slightly different social position than most of his neighbors. Skilled craftsmen in villages like this, one often held more independence than the typical villain, bound tightly to agricultural service. His skill itself was his security as smith was needed by every household, regardless of who held what land, and that gave men in his position a particular kind of standing. Neither fully free in the way a town guild member might be, nor bound to the soil in quite the same way as a plowman. Across England in this period, villages varied enormously in exactly how this worked. But the general pattern holds. Those who held a scarce, essential skill carried a little more room to maneuver within an otherwise rigid social order. As the afternoon wears on, neighbors drift toward the smithy on small errands of their own, a borrowed tool to return, a question about a broken latch, news to share while waiting for some piece of work to be finished. The smithy, in its own way, functions almost like a second village green, a gathering point shaped not by leisure but by necessity, where conversation happens almost as a byproduct of waiting. There's something worth sitting with here, quietly, about the nature of skilled work in this world. Aldous's craft will likely be passed to his own son, or perhaps to that same young apprentice working the bellows today, learned not from any book, but through years of simply watching, helping, failing, and slowly improving under a master's patient correction. This is how nearly all specialized knowledge moved through medieval society, not through institutions in the way we understand them now, but through long, patient apprenticeship. Skill passed hand to hand and eye to eye across a single generation to the next. By the time the light begins to fade, the forge's fire is allowed to die down to a deep red glow, banked carefully for tomorrow, exactly the way Mathild banks her own hearth each night. Aldous wipes the soot and sweat from his face, surveys the day's finished work, lined neatly along one wall-mended plowshare, repaired hinge, a small stack of fresh iron nails, and steps out into the cooling evening air, the ringing silence where his hammer had been only minutes before settling, gently over the whole green. Across the village, in dozens of small ways no one would think to write down, his work this single day will quietly hold together a dozen households worth of tools, doors, and implements for the season ahead. It is not the kind of contribution that makes it into any history book, but it is, in its own modest way, exactly the kind of contribution that allowed a community like this one to survive, year after year, long before anyone thought to record how. We'll return to the village again shortly, as the week moves quietly on. Every village, no matter how peaceful, eventually meets a day like this one. It begins quietly, the way these things usually do. An elderly woman 2 houses down from Mathild and Wulfric, a widow named Edith, who has lived in the village longer than almost anyone else, wakes with a fever, a tightness in her chest, and a cough that rattles a little more than it did the day before. News like this moves through a village quickly, not through any formal announcement, but simply through the ordinary traffic of daily life, a neighbor noticing smoke, not rising from a chimney at the usual hour, a passing comment at the well, a daughter sent to borrow something who returns with worry on her face instead. By midday, several women of the village, Mathild among them, have already gathered at Edith's door. It's worth pausing here, gently, to understand how medicine actually worked in this world, because it's quite different from what we might expect. There was no germ theory, yet no understanding that illness could spread from person to person through anything as invisible as the world we now know surrounds us constantly. Most people in this era understood the body through an old and surprisingly sophisticated framework inherited from ancient physicians. The idea that 4 bodily fluids, called humors, needed to remain in careful balance for a person to stay healthy. Illness meant that balance had tipped too much heat, too much cold, too much of one fluid, and not enough of another, and treatment generally aimed at nudging the body back toward equilibrium. This sounds strange to modern ears, and in many ways it was simply wrong. But it would be a mistake to imagine medieval villagers as helpless or foolish in the face of illness. Generations of careful observation had taught women like the ones gathered at Edith's door a great deal of genuinely useful, practical knowledge, which herbs eased a fever, which poultice drew out the heat of an infected wound, which teas settled a troubled stomach. Most of this knowledge passed from mother to daughter, almost entirely outside any written record, carried instead in memory and practiced hands. The village does have access to slightly more formal care if it's needed. A wise woman living at the edge of the settlement, skilled in herbs and long experience with illness and injury, serves as something between a healer and a midwife for the whole community, not a physician in the university-trained sense, which exists only in cities and serves only the wealthy, but a deeply respected source of practical medical knowledge all the same. She arrives at Edith's house by early afternoon, examines the older woman with calm, unhurried attention, and begins preparing a warm infusion of herbs gathered earlier in the season and dried carefully for exactly this purpose. What strikes you most watching a scene like this unfold is not the limitation of medieval medicine, but the sheer density of care surrounding a single sick person. Someone builds up Edith's fire so the room stays warm. Someone else brings a pot of broth, simmered slowly with whatever the household could spare. A young girl is sent to sit quietly with her for the afternoon, simply so she isn't alone. This is, in its own way, a form of medicine too, one we sometimes underestimate now, in a world where illness so often happens behind hospital doors, out of sight of neighbors and community. Here, illness was witnessed, shared, and tended to collectively, almost as a matter of course. It's also worth acknowledging, gently and honestly, that this world carried real and constant risk that we no longer face in the same way. Childhood illnesses that modern medicine handles routinely could be genuinely dangerous here. Childbirth itself carried real risk for both mother and child, and a community like this one had likely lost someone at some point to exactly the kind of fever now settling over Edith's small house. The wise woman attending her today has almost certainly also sat at deathbeds, just as she has attended joyful births, both experiences woven into the same quiet, essential role within the village. And yet, and this matters, illness here was met not with isolation, but with an almost immediate, instinctive mobilization of community. No one in this village faces sickness entirely alone. The same web of mutual obligation that shares plow teams and grazing rights also, quite naturally, extends to the sickbed. This is perhaps one of the genuine comforts of a world built so completely around interdependence. Whatever else it lacked, it rarely lacked for company in difficult moments. By evening, Edith's fever has not broken, but neither has it worsened, and the women keeping watch settle into the patient, familiar rhythm of a long night's care, taking turns resting, keeping the fire fed, murmuring quiet reassurance whenever the old woman stirs. Outside, the rest of the village continues its ordinary business, untouched directly by what's happening in this one small house, and yet somehow aware of it all the same, the way a community always senses when one of its own is struggling. Tomorrow, whatever the outcome, the village will absorb the news the way it absorbs everything collectively, quietly, without drama, simply folding whatever happens into the long accumulated memory of a place that has weathered illness, and worse, many times before, and will likely weather it many times again. By the latter half of the week, the village has settled back into its familiar rhythm, and the work outside has shifted again, subtly, toward a new and pressing concern, preparing for the winter that everyone can feel approaching, even if it remains, for now, still some weeks away. It's worth understanding just how seriously this preparation was taken, because the margin for error in this world was genuinely thin. There was no way to simply purchase food through a hard winter if the harvest came up short. What a household stored by late autumn was, quite literally, what that household would have to survive on until the following summer's crops came in. This single fact shaped nearly every decision made in these final weeks before the cold truly set in. Wulfric spends much of today on the roof of their small house, rather than in the fields. The thatch bundled reeds or straw layered thickly over the wooden roof frame needs careful attention before winter, since a poorly maintained roof means rain finding its way inside, and rain inside a one-room house in the depths of winter is no small misfortune. He works methodically, replacing thin patches, tying fresh bundles into place with practiced hands, while a neighbor below passes up fresh material and calls out occasional advice, the kind of easy, half-joking cooperation that flows naturally between men who have helped each other with this exact task for years. Inside, Mathold's work has shifted too. The household's small store of grain, threshed weeks earlier, needs careful checking for damp or mold before it's sealed away for the winter months. Apples gathered from the tree near the churchyard are laid out carefully, checked individually for bruises that might cause early rot, then stored in a cool corner of the house where they'll last, with luck, well into the new year. Herbs gathered through the summer hang in dried bundles from the low ceiling beams, ready to season the long winter's worth of pottage still to come. There's a particular, satisfying rhythm to this kind of work that's easy to overlook if you only picture medieval life as endless, undifferentiated labor. This is work with a clear and deeply felt purpose. Every sealed jar, every mended roof tile, every carefully checked apple is a small, concrete investment in the family's survival through the coming cold months. There is real skill in doing this well, accumulated over a lifetime of trial and careful observation, and real pride, too, in a household that enters winter properly prepared. The village as a whole turns its attention, in these final weeks before true winter, toward a handful of larger, shared tasks as well. Firewood needs gathering and stacking in quantities that will sound almost unbelievable to modern ears. Entire winter's worth, carefully split and stored under cover, since a single household's daily fire, kept burning for cooking, warmth, and light, consumes far more wood than we'd ever guess from a distance. Hedges and field boundaries get a final autumn trim. Livestock too old or too weak to feed through the lean months ahead are, in some cases, slaughtered now rather than later, the meat carefully salted and preserved. Since feeding an animal all winter only to lose it to cold or hunger anyway made little sense to a household counting every resource with real care. It's worth pausing gently on what this season actually reveals about medieval life, because it cuts against a common modern assumption. We tend to imagine peasants as living entirely at the mercy of fate, simply hoping for good fortune to carry them through. The truth looks rather different. This was a world of careful, accumulated practical wisdom, passed down with real precision across generations, exactly how thick a roof needed to be, exactly how long grain could be safely stored, exactly which animals were worth the cost of feeding through to spring. Survival here depended less on luck than on knowledge, skill, and the discipline to apply both consistently, year after year, long before any of it could be written down in the way we'd recognize as expertise. As the afternoon light fades early now, true autumn settling in fully, Wulfric finishes the last section of thatch and climbs down from the roof, brushing straw dust from his hands. Matold steps out to meet him, the day's preserving work mostly finished, the house behind her smelling faintly of dried apples and bundled herbs. They stand for a moment together in the cooling evening air, surveying the small accumulated proof of a week's quiet labor: a mended roof, a stocked larder, firewood stacked neatly against the side of the house. There is no dramatic triumph in this moment, no grand sense of victory, just the steady, accumulated satisfaction of a household doing, carefully and competently, exactly what it has always needed to do to see another season safely through. Inside, the fire is already catching, supper already beginning to fill the small room with warmth. And somewhere beyond the village, the first true edge of winter waits patiently in the lengthening nights, in the increasingly bare branches along the woodland's edge, in the particular chill that settles now each evening just a little earlier than the one before. The village, as it always has, will be ready for it. Not every evening in the village is quite as ordinary as the ones we've spent there so far. Tonight, as autumn settles a little deeper into the air, several households gather together at one larger home near the village green, and for a few hours, the work of the week gives way to something gentler. It's easy, looking back across so many centuries, to imagine medieval evenings as simply dark, silent, and uneventful: a candle, a closed door, sleep, and on most nights, that picture isn't far wrong. But this world also understood, deeply and instinctively, the value of shared leisure, and made room for it whenever the season and the work allowed. Tonight's gathering has no particular occasion behind it. The harvest is in, the week's heaviest labor is done, and so, as has happened countless times before, in this same room, on this same green, neighbors simply drift toward each other's firesides once the day's work is finished, drawn by little more than the pleasant prospect of company. The house belongs to one of the village's slightly more prosperous families, large enough to hold a dozen or so visitors comfortably around its central hearth. Children sit closest to the fire, half listening, half drowsing, while the adults settle onto benches and stools, mugs of weak ale passed hand to hand, the low murmur of conversation rising and falling the way it always does among people who have known each other their whole lives. Before long, someone begins to tell a story. Storytelling in this world is not a polished performance in the way we might imagine theater or film today. It is something closer to a shared, communal art, passed mouth to mouth across generations, refined and reshaped slightly with every telling. Tonight's storyteller is simply an older man from the village, well known for his memory and his patient, unhurried way of drawing a tale out exactly as long as the room wants it to last. He tells of a clever fox outwitting a far larger and far prouder wolf, a tale the children have heard perhaps a dozen times before, and yet still lean forward for, delighted anew at each familiar twist. It's worth pausing here on something easy to overlook. In a world with almost no books, and where the vast majority of people could neither read nor write, storytelling like this carried real weight. It was how moral lessons traveled, how history, however imperfectly remembered, survived from one generation to the next, how a community's sense of itself, its humor, its values, its shared understanding of the world passed down without ever once being written on a page. The stories told around hearths exactly like this one, all across England, were doing quiet, essential cultural work that no single person in that room would have thought to name out loud. After the story finishes, the evening shifts towards something livelier. Someone produces a simple wooden flute, and a few clear, simple notes drift out into the warm, smoky air. It's enough to coax a couple of the younger villagers up from their benches into a slow, circling dance, nothing elaborate. Simply linked hands moving in an easy, repeating pattern that everyone present has known since childhood. The kind of dance that requires no instruction because it has simply always been there, absorbed the way a native language is absorbed, without anyone quite remembering learning it. Others, content to stay seated, turn to smaller games. A set of knucklebones gets passed between two boys competing with real, focused intensity over a game that requires no equipment beyond what nature provides for free. An older woman in the corner works steadily at a piece of embroidery even now, her hands rarely still, conversation flowing easily around her, without ever quite interrupting the rhythm of her needle. What's striking about an evening like this one, viewed from such a distance in time, is how thoroughly ordinary it would have felt to everyone present, and how much genuine warmth it nonetheless carried. This was not a special occasion in any formal sense, no feast day, no wedding, nothing the church calendar would mark. It was simply an evening when several households chose, as they often did, to spend their rest together rather than apart. Community here was not an occasional event scheduled around the calendar. It was the quiet, default texture of daily life, woven into nearly every evening that circumstances allowed. As the fire burns lower and the youngest children finally succumb fully to sleep, slumped against patient parents, the gathering begins its slow, unhurried dissolution. Families gather coats and sleepy children, exchange final pleasantries at the door, and step out into a night now fully dark, breath visible in the cold autumn air. The village green quiet and empty beneath a wide scatter of stars undimmed by any light but their own. Walking home along the familiar path, Mathild and Wulfric speak little, both comfortably tired in the particular way that follows a pleasant evening rather than a hard day's labor. Behind them, one by one, the lit windows of the village go dark, until only the faint glow of banked embers remains in each quiet house, waiting patiently for morning. We have nearly reached the end of our week now, and it's worth pausing before we close this particular chapter of the village's life to look at it as a whole, to see, gathered together, everything we've quietly witnessed across these few days. We began in darkness, before the birds, with a woman coaxing a small flame back to life in a banked hearth. We followed a household through fields divided by patient centuries of careful, shared tradition. We walked a winding road to a market town, humming with trade and unfamiliar faces, then back again to the steady, essential rhythm of a blacksmith's forge. We sat, briefly, with illness and the quiet collective care that met it. We watched a household prepare, with real skill and real diligence, for a winter not yet arrived. And just last night, we shared in something simpler still. Firelight, an old story, a few unhurried hours among neighbors. None of this, on its own, would ever make it into a history book. There is no single dramatic event here, no battle, no coronation, no document that survived 8 centuries for us to read today. And that, in its own way, is exactly the point. The vast majority of human history was lived by people exactly like Mathild and Wulfric, in villages exactly like this one, through weeks built almost entirely from labor, rest, faith, and the steady company of people who depended on one another in ways modern life has, in many respects, quietly let go of. It would be easy, looking back from where we stand now, to feel only relief that we don't have to live this way ourselves, and there is real truth in that relief. The constant physical labor, the genuine vulnerability to illness and bad harvests, the complete absence of the comforts and conveniences we now take entirely for granted, these were real burdens carried daily without complaint, because there was no alternative to carry them with. But it's worth resisting the urge to see only hardship here, because that wouldn't be quite honest either. This was also a world rich in things modern life sometimes struggles to hold on to, a deep, embedded sense of belonging to a particular place and a particular community. Work whose results you could see and touch with your own hands, season after season. Evenings spent, more often than not, in the genuine company of people who had known you your entire life. A rhythm to existence shaped by sun and season rather than by notifications and deadlines, slower in ways that could be both a burden and, quietly, a gift. As our week in this small English village draws to its close, the rhythm simply continues, the way it always has, and the way it will for generations yet to come. Tomorrow, the fields will need attention again. The shared ox team will need scheduling. The church bell will ring its familiar hours, marking labor and rest in exactly the pattern it has marked them for as long as anyone in the village can remember. We leave Mathild and Wulfric now much as we found them, not as figures from a history book, but as two ordinary people doing the quiet, essential work of simply continuing, day after day, the way countless households exactly like theirs did across the whole of medieval England, largely unrecorded, almost entirely unremembered by name, and yet utterly essential to everything that followed. Their week is ending. Ours, for tonight, is too. Let the village rest now, the way it has every night for as long as it has stood. Somewhere behind us, in that small fold of English countryside, the fires have burned down to quiet embers. Mathild and Wulfric are asleep. The forge stands cold and silent until morning. The church tower holds its bell still, patient, until the hour comes round again to ring it. We came here tonight not to learn dates, or to memorize the names of kings, but simply to sit, quietly, inside a single ordinary week of a life lived 800 years before our own. And perhaps what stays with you now isn't any single fact at all, but a feeling the particular comfort of a banked fire kept alive through a long night. The plain satisfaction of bread shared at a low table. The sound of neighbors gathered easily around a hearth, asking nothing of each other but company. These people left no letters behind, no portraits, no record of their own voices. And yet, in everything we've walked through together tonight, something of them remains in the shape of the fields that still, in places, hold the memory of those old strip boundaries. In the stone of churches that still stand, weathered but upright, in villages much like this one. In the quiet, accumulated inheritance of patience, skill, and care that carried one generation safely into the next, long enough for all of it, eventually, to reach us. You don't need to remember any of it perfectly. That was never really the point. All you needed to do tonight was rest a little, here, beside this small fire that burned its way through history so long ago, and let the village and its week and its quiet, unhurried rhythm carry you gently towards sleep. Good night.